Welcome to the historic Ocean House, a luxurious hotel that pays homage to New England's golden age of hospitality. With timeless elegance and renewed civility, this treasured resort is the setting for our special broadcast of the Ocean House Author Series. Each program features nationally best-selling and award-winning authors in a salon-style conversation, hosted by Ocean House owner, actress, and best-selling author Deborah Goodrich Royce. WCRI is pleased to partner with the Ocean House to present this ongoing series, which brings you the best and the brightest of the literary world. Now, let's take you to the Ocean House.
Fiona Davis is the New York Times bestselling author of several historical fiction novels set in iconic New York City buildings, including the Magnolia Palace, the Address, The Lions of Fifth Avenue, which was a Good Morning America book club pick, and her most recent novel, The Stolen Queen. Her novels have been chosen as One Book, One Community Reads, and her articles have appeared in publications like The Wall Street Journal and the Oprah magazine. She first went to New York as an actress, but fell in love with writing after getting a master's degree at Columbia Journalism School. Her books have sold more than 1 million copies to date and have been translated into more than 20 languages. And she's based in New York City. Welcome, Fiona. Thank you. Fiona will be in conversation tonight with Deborah Goodrich Royce. Deborah's thrillers examine puzzles of identity. Reef Road hit Publisher Weekly's bestsellers list, Good Morning America's top 15 list, and was an Indie Next pick by the American Booksellers Association. Ruby Falls won the Zibby Award for Best Plot Twist, and Finding Mrs. Ford was hailed by Forbes, Book Riot, and Good Morning America's Best Of lists. She began as an actress on All My Children and in multiple films before transitioning to the role of story editor at Miramax, where she developed Emma and early versions of Chicago and A Wrinkle in Time. With her husband Chuck, Deborah restored the Avon Theater, the Ocean House Hotel, Deer Mountain Inn, the United Theater, Martin House Books, and numerous Main Street revitalization projects in both Rhode Island and the Catskills. Fiona and Deborah will now discuss Fiona's latest book, The Stolen Queen, and after that, we will open it up to questions from the audience. So if you wouldn't mind just raising your hand, we'll run you a mic so we can capture it for the folks listening in the future. And without any further ado, please join me in giving a warm welcome to Fiona Davis and Deborah Goodrich Royce.
Thank you, Fiona. We last spoke in Greenwich about Magnolia Palace, so I am a huge fan of your work, and we're going to talk about so many aspects of what you do. But I always like for anybody, who has read The Stolen Queen?
Oh, wow.
Oh, you're in for a treat. You are in for a great treat. So why don't you probably don't like the term elevator pitch, but give us kind of a concise version of what this book is about.
Sure. And I have to say, it's just such a joy to be interviewed by another author. I think that you add a level of something to it that it's really, so very much appreciate being here. And thank you again for Martin House for selling books and for supporting your local indie bookstore. So important. So my elevator pitch, I'd say it takes about 6 stories to say. The Stolen Queen is set in 1978 at the Met Museum, and it's partly from the point of view of a 60-year-old curator named Charlotte, and she is very unwillingly teamed up with her exact opposite, and that's Annie, who's a 19-year-old overeager, underqualified assistant to the Met Gala. And they have to try and track down this significant artifact that they're both very much personally invested in. Part of the book takes place in 1930s Egypt when Charlotte, the curator, was a young woman. And I like to say it's about mothers and daughters. It's about female friendship. There are hidden secrets. There's a deadly curse. And I realized when I was on book tour that it's a mix of glamour and mummies. But also, the best pitch for it is it's a cross between Indiana Jones meets Thelma and Louise meets The Devil Wears Prada.
Exactly.
Right? That's it.
It is exactly. In Hollywood, that would be the kind of the way you'd pitch it. So The Stolen Queen, the title, is a great title. And I was going to say it's a double entendre, but it actually plays out maybe at more than 2 levels. So talk a little bit. Did you know what you were calling it at the beginning, and how did you come to it?
No, I called whatever book I'm working on, I call it by the building. So this was the Met book. And I let my agent and my editor figure out the title because they're much better than I am. So they came up with Stolen Queen much later. And it's tricky because with these books, you have to make it refer to not only the plot, but also the building, right? So the Masterpiece, which is about Grand Central, was about the art school in Grand Central, but also about Grand Central as a landmark building. And should it be saved or should it not? And so for this one, there are multiple levels, and I keep on realizing there are more than I expected. So you have the stolen artifact, which is known as the Cerulean Queen, and that's based on this beautiful sculpture called Fragment of a Queen's Face that's at the Met. And all it is the cheek and lip of a statue, and it's made out of yellow jasper, the original one. And it's stunning. The lips are the most exquisite lips you've ever seen. The chin is perfect. And you can just only imagine what the rest of it looked like. And so I wanted to use that in the book, but I didn't want to use the exact artifact because then people might think it went stolen. And I didn't want to confuse people, so I call it the Cerulean Queen, and it's made out of a blue stone for the book. So there's that. And then you have, for example, Charlotte, who in a way is a queen. She's so good at her job. She's 60 years old. She runs the show. She does all the work and gets none of the credit. And in a way, her life was stolen from her when she was in Egypt through a tragedy that occurred. And she's been kind of closed off and in a way suffering ever since. And so there's a multiple, and then you also have the female pharaoh who Charlotte is very interested in terms of research, and she really feels like her discoveries about this rare female pharaoh will change everything and give her a whole new burst into her career, a real boost to what she does. And that female pharaoh is based on Hatshepsut, whose story is quite something, and she's also a stolen queen because for a long time no one thought she was very important. And I can explain that more later, but eventually they realized, oh no, she was hugely important. And in a way, her legacy was stolen.
So let's talk a little bit about the writing of historical fiction, particularly in the way that you do it. You have some real characters, someone I've always called Diana Vreeland, but the characters in the book have to call her Diana. So you have real people, you have fictitious characters. How do you... And even historically, because you call her Hathakare rather than Hatshepsut. Yeah. So how do you decide when you're going to use a real person and when you're going to use a fictitious?
What I try to do is in the research, I do a ton of research, and then I use that as a scaffolding to layer a fictional characters and story over. That's my preference, because you have so much freedom. And especially when every book has a mystery element, and from writing a story with a mystery, you need to have the freedom to have characters do what they need to do in order to keep the tension up as you write. And so for this book, I really had to think about that because most of the characters are fictional. Charlotte is based on a real woman named Christiane de Roche-Noble-Court, who, if you read, Lynn Olson wrote a nonfiction book called Empress of the Nile. And it's about this incredible archaeologist and French resistance fighter who did all kinds of wonderful things. And I used that book as an inspiration for what Charlotte goes through in the 1930s. And so, but Charlotte is very fictional. There's no curator at the Met like her. It's not, I wanted to be careful about that. But then there was Diana Vreeland, and she did run the costume exhibit and the Met Gala in 1978. And she was a tornado of a woman. She was a force of nature. And I thought, how can you possibly duplicate that? Right? How can, she's one of a kind. And you couldn't come up with someone different. It would be wrong. And so there I thought, okay, I'm going to keep her as is. And it was so much fun writing her scenes because it was as if she came down and told me what to say. And a lot of what she says in the book, she actually said, like, yellow, only Matisse and I know yellow. Or, the best thing about London is Paris. Or unshined shoes are the end of civilization. All these things are what she really said. And so I thought, okay, we'll keep her. And if someone has passed away, it's okay to recreate them in a book. You have that freedom.
And she's not a point of view character. She's a main character, but you are not completely in her head thinking for her.
No.
And maybe is that a distinguishing line?
Big time, yeah. She's a supporting character who kind of rushes into scenes and then rushes out, as I imagine she did in real life. But then the pharaoh was tricky because the first draft, I was writing Hatshepsut as the real female pharaoh that these incredible things were discovered about. And then about halfway through, I thought, if I'm giving my character Charlotte all of the credit for these real life discoveries, for example, finding her mummy, or discovering that in fact she was this incredible ruler, which they figured out in the 1950s. And before that, the Met had called her a vain, ambitious, and unassuming leader, right? And a detested stepmother. And then later they did some digging and they realized, oh no, she was really loved and honored, and they changed everything. And so I thought, here's this woman who's had her legacy stolen away. And in a way, I'm stealing the legacy of the people who figured all that out, because I have to compress the timeline to have Charlotte do all of that in her life. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, instead of doing that, it would be better to call her a different name. So I call her Hathor Kare. And in the author's note, I've described very clearly who Hatshepsut was, who really did the work, and also just provide the resources that I use so that other people can go down that same rabbit hole.
So Egyptomania, you were saying you were just at the Avon Theater in Stamford, Connecticut, which is a theater we restored. And my husband and I used to go to this thing in Utah called the Art House Convergence, which is a gathering of hundreds of insane people from around North America, United States and Canada, who restore theaters. There's a subset of old theaters which are Egyptian. So there was round one Egyptomania, which Fiona, you go right into the 1930s, which it is very Indiana Jones. But round two was really the 1970s. You're all probably too young. How many of you remember this touring King Tut exhibition?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I grew up in Detroit. I went with my mom to Toronto to see it. It was such a big deal. It is hard to imagine, and I wanted to ask you about that. Are there exhibitions now that people drive, to another country to see? I mean, maybe the reopening of the museum in Amsterdam. What do we do that for now?
I think the Vermeer exhibit was
maybe.
Probably one where they had all the Vermeers. I think it was in Amsterdam, wasn't it?
Yes.
All in one, or many of them. And there's only 33, I think. So I think something like that would be the equivalent. But yeah, it was the first blockbuster exhibit. Mm-hmm. And that's partly why I set the book in 1978, because in September of 78, they brought the Temple of Dender over from Egypt, and they rebuilt it, and that exhibit opened in 1978, and that's where they hold the Met Gala, the big disco. And it's a great, if you ever get there and see that temple, it's wonderful because there's graffiti on it from the 1800s, which is kind of incredible. And and so then the book takes place in November, and it's about 2 weeks before the Met Gala happened, and that's when it was held. Right now it's held the first Monday in May, of course, but back then it was in November. And then the King Tut exhibit opened in December. And so, as you know, you want to put pressure on your characters, and I thought by having the King Tut exhibit looming, it just adds to the pressure of what needs to get done, as well as, of course, hold the Met Gala.
Which is a very obvious ticking clock, which is fantastic when you have a historical setting for the reader. You don't even have to hammer that over the head, because you know what's coming. And if you set something in Hawaii on November 30th, what was it, 1941 that we entered the war? Yeah. People know what's coming. Mm-hmm.
Right.
So artifacts, temples coming to the Met Museum. Talk a little bit about this idea of repatriation. Who owns these cultural artifacts? There have been arguments, do you leave these artifacts in countries that perhaps are unstable? What's the right thing to do?
It's such a huge question, and I knew I had to bring it up. To be honest, the Met was a little concerned about me using the word stolen in the title, because of course they don't want to. But it had to be there, and I had to talk about repatriation because it's a huge issue that's going on today. And basically what it is you have things like the Benin bronzes, right? And they were taken from what's now modern Nigeria in 1897 by the British in a very bloody and violent occupation. And there are photos of these British soldiers standing next to piles of looted artifacts. And they were spread all around the world. It's the British Museum, the Met, they're all over the place. And of course they want them back. But it's a question of what do you do if the country doesn't have a museum to put them in? What if they can't guarantee the security or to keep them safe from humidity? Or what if the government needs money? And so they sell them to a Russian oligarch who puts them in his villa. And then researchers, students, scholars, they can't get access. And so it's a really tough question. There's no easy answers. I bring it up in the book, but of course I can't solve it. Egypt was interesting because it had a system called partage that lasted, I think, until the 70s, where if a foreign country came to do an excavation, like the Met would do, they could keep half of whatever they found, and Egypt got the other half. And that system was in place, so it's not like things were looted from Egypt. But it's a really tough question. And the Met now has a job position called the Director of Provenance. And that's his job, is to figure out what to do with these items that were stolen. And even today I was just looking at the Times, and there's an artifact from Iraq that they just sent back. So they're analyzing things, trying to figure out what's the right thing to do, and then hopefully doing the right thing.
Auction houses have to do that too.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a really big aspect of that business now. And my husband and I bought two, he's here somewhere, we bought two minor paintings at Sotheby's.
Yeah.
And then we got a call that they were listed with Interpol. How Sotheby's did not know that these paintings, it got straightened out, but it was a complicated, there was a long holding period.
I have two good stories about that. One is there was a guy who had all of these stolen artifacts from somewhere in East Asia, and he had them in his apartment, and he had a huge, Architectural Digest, do a huge thing on his apartment.
Ruh-roh.
And there is a whole unit in New York that all they do is deal with stolen art. And so they went and took them all back. And the way I got the idea to write this book was, I'd thought about setting a book at the Met, but it's enormous. And there are 18 or 19 departments. I just thought, how will I figure out what to focus on? And then I read an article in the New York Times, and it talked about the 2018 Met Gala. And Kim Kardashian went. And I never thought I'd talk about Kim Kardashian in an author talk. But she wore this really tight gold glittery dress. And at some point in the evening, she stood next to this sarcophagus that was also glittery and gold, and that the Met had acquired a few years before for $4 million. So the photo goes viral to the point that the Jordanian smuggler who'd stolen the sarcophagus complained to an undercover informant that he'd never gotten paid. And this got back to the Manhattan DA's office, and the unit did some investigating, and they found that the papers had been falsified, and the Met was forced to return it.
Wow.
And yeah, so I thought, what a great mashup of pop culture and ancient art, all embodied in this one building, and then that's how I knew my way into the story.
We'll take a short break and be back with the Ocean House Author Series here on WCRI.
Ocean House, located on the scenic Atlantic Ocean in historic Watch Hill, is one of only 14 555-star resorts in the world, with superb guest accommodations, a world-class spa, dining, and events. This year, the Ocean House is once again hosting one of their most popular events, the Ocean House Author Series with Deborah Goodrich Royce. Enjoy a discussion with historian and multi-book author Jim Pierce on Wednesday, July 2nd at 5 p.m. They will be discussing his latest historical novel, Churchill, The Beginning. Attendance includes a signed copy of the featured book, insightful conversations, as well as complimentary wine and delicious light bites. Held at the breathtaking Ocean House, this exciting event begins at 5 p.m., Wednesday, July 2nd. For information and tickets, go to oceanhouseevents.com. That's oceanhouseevents.com.
And we're back with the Ocean House Authors Series on WCRI.
So let's talk about buildings. This is a signature thing that you do. You choose an iconic building, but it's more than a building. These buildings are institutions in the life of New York City. How did this get started? Did you know it was going to be a signature for you? Give us some of that history.
No, I had no idea. My first book came about because I'd been a journalist, and I learned about the Barbizon Hotel for Women, and it had gone condo, and when it went condo, there were a dozen of the old-time residents still living there, and they were grandfathered into rent-controlled apartments on the 4th floor, while they built these luxury condos around them. And they were in their 80s or 90s, they'd lived there for decades. And I just thought, what was it like when one of these women who is paying $120 a month runs into the elevator and runs into the guy who bought the $17 million penthouse, right? Who comes out alive? And I thought, what a great article, but they were very private at that time. They would not be interviewed. And I just couldn't shake it. And I started thinking this could be a great book, and we could set it at the Barbizon in 2 different time periods, so you get a real sense of how the building and the city and the people have changed over time. And so that became my first book. And I think as a journalist, I need an anchor, right? I'm so impressed by people who sit down and, I'll just come up with a book. I need to do that research. I need to find out about this building and use that as my inspiration. And so after that, I was walking down Central Park West, and I've lived in New York for 40-something years now. And I was walking by the Dakota, and the sun was hitting it, and it was just glowing like it was saying, choose me. And I thought, it'd be so great to get in there. But I didn't know anyone who lived there, and I'd never been inside, so I thought, well, that's not possible. And a friend of mine who's a real estate agent said, Lauren Bacall's apartment is on the market for $23 million. Let's go. So we dressed up, and we got this wonderful tour. It was an estate sale. She died a few years earlier. But we got this incredible tour of Lauren Bacall's apartment, and it had all of the original detail, the molding, the fireplaces, the floors. I just was trying to memorize every detail while saying, is there parking? And that became the next book. And then I thought, this is my thing, I guess. Right. And it's so wonderful because each book is completely different.
So we have the Barbizon, the Dakota,
Grand Central, Chelsea Hotel,
the Frick,
the library.
New York Public Library, the one on 42nd.
Yep. And then the Frick.
Radio City Music Hall.
Thank you. Radio City Music Hall, and then this one. And with each one, when I'm doing the research, I'm looking for whatever surprises come up.
Yep.
So for example, like the lines of Fifth Avenue, doing research and learning that when they built the library, the big one on Fifth Avenue, they included a 7-room apartment deep inside for the superintendent and his family to live in. And his daughter, in real life, the daughter was born in the library. The kids used to play baseball using books as bases until they got caught.
What time period?
1910. They moved in around 1911 when the library opened, and they were there for 30 years. Wow. Yeah, and I just thought, a family living in the library. Great, let's do it. That's a book.
So, have you ever gone to the train show at New York Botanical Garden?
No,
you must go,
yes.
Because they take New York City buildings. There's an artist, he might be dead, or he's turned it over to his daughter, if he's still alive. He makes New York City buildings in plant material, twigs and seeds and leaves and nuts, and they're extraordinary. So it's what's it called, LGB train? They're the bigger ones. It's a German train. They're not the teeny, Lionels. Yeah. And they go all around this conservatory. They're up, the Brooklyn Bridge is going over your head, but you walk around and you see these the Empire State Building and the New York Public Library, and on and on and on. So
I
you
will
have to go.
I will. I had no idea.
Find ideas.
Yeah.
There. It's very cool.
Oh.
It's for kids, but it's not just for kids. And they do like bar car nights where you can, go have cocktails. So the dual timelines, you're very known for that. Lots of people do it differently. I have Beatrice Williams writes one section, then she writes another section and splices them together. I kind of write as the reader reads it. What do you do?
It depends. Most of the books I do plot everything out. I'm the daughter of engineers, so there's something to me that needs that to go on. And so what I'll do is I'll do all the research, I'll come up with the characters, figure out who they are, what obstacles I can put in the way of what they want. Because I always joke around that the last thing you want to read is about a happy family that gets happier, right? Although I think Ann Patchett did it in Tom Lake. I actually think she did, because only she could do it. But once I know that, I figure out what the plot will be on each timeline, and then I very carefully braid it together. And again, with a mystery, you have to be so careful, because you can give away something too early in one timeline that screws up the other. And those 2 weeks that I'm doing that braiding, I'm usually drinking a lot of wine at night, because your head just hurts from, okay, that won't work. What about this? But once I have that, I have a roadmap. And then I can follow that as I write. I tend to do the older plot line first, and then the newer one.
So you take, really, you can quantify, it's 2 weeks that you take to really, and is that a chapter breakdown?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep, and each chapter will have 3 scenes. Like I have it down to, each scene has to be 1,100 words. Like but I need that. I'm one of those people that needs to check something off at the end of the day. So if my to-do list says write 1,100 words, I will do it just for the satisfaction. Yeah, but the thing is, if you do that after 3 or 4 months, you have a book. And you almost didn't expect it. It just kind of jumps up that I'm almost done with another draft.
And is that your time frame for a draft, 4 months?
Yeah. I write pretty quickly, but then I do about 10 different rounds of revisions. Mm-hmm. And that's layering and changing and adjust. And there's always adjustments.
Do you go to your editor every time?
I go to my agent first.
Yeah.
And she gives intense notes. In fact, there's a bunch of us that we're all clients of the same agent. And we all know that after getting our notes back, we're allowed to call each other and cry. But it's great because it makes the book better. You need a good editor because you can't see the forest for the trees when you're in it. And you can't see the things that are just so glaringly obvious about a character issue or a plot issue. And then after that, it does go to the editor.
So I wanted to ask you, going back to where we were before, the book is a lot about women and power. And I think this is an evergreen topic throughout human history. Yeah. Women have struggled with power. And when you have a theme like that, so you have your plot, you have your structure, you have your story, but you have a very strong theme there. Is that there from the beginning, and how do you weave it in?
It's not. I tend to go in kind of blind, and I knew I wanted a character who was 60 years old because I'm 58, and I feel like we're underrepresented as the main character. It tends to be younger or older. And so I knew that's what I wanted Charlotte to be, and it was just kind of developing it out from there. But then when I learned, and I'll talk a little bit about Hatshepsut, because I think she really was the thing that made me realize, oh, that's the theme, was that she was born in Egypt. She was of royalty. She married her half-brother at 12, because that's what you did in Egypt. I was talking to Kate Quinn, the author, and she was saying, oh yes, the Egyptian family tree is very narrow. Which I thought was perfect.
And they died out.
Yeah, and so he died 7 years later.
Yeah.
And she didn't have a male son, and so the closest thing was the son of a concubine who was an infant. But he couldn't rule, and so Hatshepsut stepped up, and she ruled as regent for 20 years. There was peace, there was prosperity, all of these advances in art and architecture, no war. It was an incredible time period. But then she died, and at some point after she died, her stepson came into power, and he had a lot of her images hacked out of the reliefs, and he had a lot of the statues destroyed. Because of that, she was really lost to history. And no one, they knew she reigned, but they thought, well, she couldn't have been important. And then in the 1920s, the Met were doing an excavation, and they found this quarry filled with broken statue pieces. And they put them together and realized, oh, no, she was very important. So what happened? And they said, well, it must have been because he was angry that she usurped his power for so long. And so that's why they, in the catalog, they call her this vain, ambitious woman. And she was really disregarded. And it wasn't until 10 years later that a scholar was doing some work, and he realized all of that destruction had to have happened at least 10 years, at least 24 years after her death. That's a long time to hold a grudge. And they started rethinking it, and they said, well, maybe what it was the stepson. He was near the end of his reign, and he wanted his son to take over, but there may have been females from other clans who also had a right to the throne. And so he wanted to erase the idea of a female pharaoh from the public view. And it makes sense because the destruction stopped about soon after his son was guaranteed to be the heir. And so I realized here's a woman, she was absolutely adored, and then she was erased, and then she was reviled, and then she was restored. And I thought, what an interesting pathway for her, and let's have Charlotte go on that same journey. And what was so interesting, because I went to Egypt for research, and I went to the museum where Hatshepsut's mummy lies there. And it was only recently found, and it's found in the same way it's described in the book, which is very exciting. And I walked in, and it's this dark room, and you're supposed to keep your voice down. And I remember walking around her mummy and thinking, oh my goodness, that's her. That's the woman who walked Egypt 3,500 years ago. Sorry, getting emotional, the actress in me. That's the woman who walked the earth and ruled Egypt 3,500 years ago. There she is. Those are her nails. That's her hair. And it was just this weird mashup of past and present that I wanted to try and bring that energy into the book as well. So we can see that in the past, women have gone through all kinds of things, and we're still going through all kinds of things. But there is, I think, a line between us that keeps us strong.
I think so too. Curses. You're sort of alluding to being in the room and being quiet. So you're all familiar with it was King Tut, right? Why don't you talk a little bit about that famous curse and how it played out for everybody who opened that tomb?
Yeah, it's a bit of a myth when you start digging down into it. The idea was that King Tut's tomb, which was found, it was one of the very first unplundered tombs. So there was beautiful things in it, gold chariots and incredible toys for him to play with, everything he could want. Mummified geese for when he was hungry. And so that was a huge deal. And the people who found it was Lord Carnarvon, and he was an English, he funded it, an English earl, I think he was. And his daughter and a number of other people. Howard Carter was the main archaeologist who helped. And Lord Carnarvon died about 6 weeks after they found it. And so they started saying, oh, it was this curse, it was this terrible curse. But in fact, he died of an infected mosquito bite. So it's not quite. To the point where when I was doing research and I had this curse, I sent the book to an Egyptologist to say, could you please just, take a look at it? And she read it and she said, there's not really Egyptian curses, to be honest. And I said, can I have one? And she said, yes. Because my agent really wants a curse. And so it's interesting. It's a bit of a myth, to be honest, when you start digging down. But there is a thought that there might have been a fungus in these crypts that may have, affected the people who went inside, because there have been instances where people died.
So it was like Legionnaire's disease in a way.
Perhaps, yes.
Something, they went in there. And one of the things you make very clear is that most of the tombs were plundered over centuries.
Oh, yeah.
From, when by the French, by everybody who was marauding through Egypt.
And even they would bury the kings and the pharaohs with all their gold, and within 50 years, someone would come and plunder it. So they've been plundered for thousands and thousands of years, many of them. What was so interesting about the book was about 4 weeks after it came out, they announced that they'd found the first unplundered tomb since King Tut, and it's Hatshepsut's husband. And so I had people emailing me going, did you know? I was like, no.
It's kind of cool, though.
Very cool.
So to that point, would you ever revisit characters in a story?
Yeah, people have said, oh, I'd like to see Annie's story, because she's interesting. She's, 19. She's a parentified child where her mother was a model and is very needy, and, she's spent her whole 19 years taking care of her mother. And in the course of the book, she becomes assistant to Diana Vreeland, which she's completely unqualified for, and causes all kinds of trouble. And but eventually, she's looking for a mentor. She's looking for a woman to show her how to be in the world, because she just doesn't know. And so she turns to Diana Vreeland and then Charlotte. And I love her story, and I think she would be fun to follow to see what she does next.
Speaking of next, before we open it up to all of you, do you have a New York City institution in mind? Are you comfortable talking about it?
Oh yeah.
Please.
Oh yeah, it's so much fun. There's such a lag time between, as when you
Yes.
turn in a book and when it gets published, that I like to get started on something new, because otherwise I end up buying living room furniture. Like I need something to focus on. And so there's a house that I've loved for years, and hardly anyone knows about it. It's the oldest house in Manhattan. It's called the Morris Jumel Mansion. Anyone?
Yes.
Okay, we've got a few. And it's incredible. It's up on 160th Street, so not that many people venture up that way. And it's this beautiful house with columns. It's white. It looks like it belongs in Georgia or Virginia. It's surrounded by gardens. And it was the headquarters for George Washington during the Revolutionary War. And then in 1810, a woman bought it named Eliza Jumel. She's great. She was born the daughter of a prostitute in Providence in the 1700s. And she moved to New York, and she became the richest woman in Manhattan because she was so good at real estate. And she was crazy and really interesting. Her ghost still haunts the mansion. And so, for example, her second husband was Aaron Burr.
Oh.
But it didn't last long, because he was trying to take her money, and she did not like that. And so she hired as her divorce attorney Alexander Hamilton Jr.
Oh.
So there is so much great stuff.
Fascinating.
She's incredible. Yeah, it's good fun.
And do you have a title?
No, so if any ideas, please. No, I do not have a title yet.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
We'll take a short break and be back with the Ocean House Author Series here on WCRI.
Ocean House, located on the scenic Atlantic Ocean in historic Watch Hill, is one of only 14 triple five-star resorts in the world, with superb guest accommodations, a world-class spa, dining, and events. This year, Ocean House is once again hosting one of its most popular events, the Ocean House Author Series with Deborah Goodrich Royce. Enjoy a discussion with Mary Alice Monroe, New York Times bestselling author of over 30 books, on Wednesday, July 9th at 5 p.m. They will be discussing her newest novel, Where the Rivers Merge. Attendance includes a signed copy of the featured book, insightful conversation, as well as complimentary wine and delicious light bites. Held at the breathtaking Ocean House, this exciting event begins at 5 p.m. Wednesday, July 9th. For information and tickets, go to oceanhouseevents.com. That's oceanhouseevents.com.
And we're back with the Ocean House Author Series on WCRI.
I think it's time. I know you all have questions. You can ask about any book, about writing.
Yeah, if there's any authors who have, or about any of the other books, or writing in general, or just books in general.
Hi. I was wondering, what are your thoughts about what was recently discovered under the large pyramid in Giza?
What's that?
Oh, you haven't seen
No.
it or heard about it?
No.
Underneath the pyramid, way down below, they have metallic tubes that run long, many, many meters down. It almost seems like some kind of like electric use, that the pyramid was really created for bringing electricity.
It's actually a nuclear reactor. Yeah. No.
Could be.
Interesting. No, I had not seen that.
Yeah.
The last thing I'd heard was that they found, the question was, how did they make the pyramids? And they realized there may have been ancient rivers that they could have, gotten the blocks up that way. So that's the latest thing I saw. But I will look out these strange tubes.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Interesting.
And they don't know what it's about yet.
Yeah.
They just discovered it. There's also a passageway from the Sphinx to the pyramid, which is also something they just discovered.
What's incredible about Egypt is so much is still buried under the sand. The Sphinx were completely buried, pretty much. And so they're just digging down and finding these incredible things every day.
That sort of blows my mind, that is everything just getting bigger, that the earth is getting higher? So you think about Rome, all these Paris, there's so much down there that was at the surface. Is the globe getting larger?
I think for Rome, it's people building on top of ruins.
But in Egypt, it's
the sand.
Right.
Yeah,
So
the
we're
sand
not
sweeping
getting
in from the Sahara. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I have loved all your books, but I do have a question about the spectacular. How much access to the Rockettes of today did you get when you were researching that book?
That's a very good question. Yes. So the spectacular is set at Radio City Music Hall, and I'll just tell you quickly how it came about because it's a great story. I was in between books. I wasn't sure what to do, and I got an email through my author website, and a woman wrote, and she said, I'm 85 years old. I'm a former Rockette, and if you want to know all the secrets about Radio City Music Hall, you should call me. I was like, yep. So I called her, and she sent all of her archival material, programs, schedules, photographs. Incredible. And so through that, I got to know, I wanted our Rockettes who were in their kind of 80s or 90s so that they danced in the 50s and 60s, because I knew that's when I wanted to set it. And so through that network, I met a number of women like that. And eventually, when the book came out, her name was Sandy. And she came to the first launch event in Spring Lake at Thunder Road Books. And we were doing it in this beautiful old theater. And she sat in the front row and she answered questions. And then at the end, I was signing books in the lobby. And I looked over and they'd set up a table and she was signing books too. It was just
Your book?
Yeah.
She was signing.
It was perfect. Yes.
That's very sweet.
I wish I could take her everywhere. So, but I'll tell you, the current situation at Radio City Music Hall is very corporate. With a lot of these buildings, it's wonderful. The New York Public Library, the Frick, it's a board of directors. They are so welcoming and, absolutely wonderful to work with. Radio City is its own thing. It's owned by James Dolan, who owns Madison Square Garden, and it's just a whole corporate entity. So they were fine. They were perfectly fine, and I did get a wonderful backstage tour. But I wasn't as concerned about the Mets. The Radio City today, the Rockettes of today, because I needed to know what it was like in the 50s. How many kicks did they do a day? What was the schedule? It was a movie palace, not a theater. So it's very different.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
I have a question on the spectacular. So the mystery in it of the bombings, how much of that was accurate and true?
Pretty much all of it. It was fascinating. So every book I do, I have a building and I have a story that's internal to the building. But then I find something outside of New York or in the city itself to kind of anchor the reader in whatever decade it's in. So I was looking at, what happened in New York in the 50s? And I found a thing on Google that said in 1958, I think it was, they were ramping up their hunt for the Mad Bomber. And I said, what? And it turns out this guy had been setting bombs. He set, I want to get this right, 33 bombs over the course of 15 years. He injured a number of people, some very seriously, and they couldn't find him. They could not catch him. And what he'd do is he'd cut a kind of a slit in the seat and stick a pipe bomb inside. And he hit Radio City twice. One woman was thrown, 2 rows up in the air. And no one had heard of him. It was almost like the Morris Jumel Mansion, right? Mm-hmm. No one had heard of it. And to the point where when I did talks, most people hadn't heard of it, except I remember one where a woman said, oh yeah, I grew up in Queens at that time. And when you went to the movies, you'd check your seat. It was so incredible. And so a lot of that, he didn't kill anyone in real life, but pretty much a lot that's in there is exactly true. And he was eventually found in Waterbury, Connecticut. Yeah, in fact, the town there invited me to come and do a whole thing because they were so proud.
native son. Well, that is interesting.
Yeah.
You said that you write your book in 4 months, you outline in 2 months. How long do you spend on the research? Because it sounds as if you do so much research. And how do you know when you've done enough?
That's such a good question. I do about 3 to 4 months of research, and I think having been a journalist, it helps because I'm basically finding experts in whatever I'm trying to write about. And you know, the key is to find people who will talk to you versus reading something or finding something on the internet, because really talking to someone in person is where you get the gold. And so I do a lot of that. For this book, I went to Egypt with my boyfriend, Greg, and we spent about
Wave, Greg.
There's Greg. He's an author, too.
Yes.
Writes thrillers. And we spent a wonderful time in Cairo. We went up the Nile. We went to the Valley of the Kings. We did everything. And it was so helpful because it's the kind of thing where in the book I wanted to describe what it's like when the sand covers the sun and everything turns this weird orange color. And you can't do that unless you've been there. And I wanted to feel like I was bringing the reader with me. So when they're reading the book, they feel like they're there. And you can only do that by going.
I can testify. You did describe the sky very well. And it made me think of Los Angeles, where I've lived, because the sky in LA is rarely that, very crisp blue that we have here with crisp white clouds. It's murky.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You got that one.
In the book, The Dollhouse, we all were affected by John Lennon's death. How did the original tenants, did that scare them living there, or what effect did it have on them?
Yeah, it was tricky. You're talking about the address, actually, the Dakota. Yeah, the Dakota, I wanted to avoid John Lennon. That's a book in itself, and I didn't want to step on toes or claim it in any way. So to be honest, I stayed away from it. I have it happen, I think it's in 1984, so it's 4 years after his death. And it's as they're creating Strawberry Fields, the memorial to him. Mm-hmm. And so that's integrated in a way, but I didn't want to go there. And so the book is set in 1984 and 1884. So in the end, I didn't really ask that question. And in a way, it was better not to, because I think for anyone who was there, it had to have been pretty horrific. And I just thought best to not go there. Good question, though.
When you're visiting Egypt, have you ever been tempted to just put a little something in your pocket? I have. Because, no, tempted. Well, because you can fall in love with art, and it sounds like you have.
Oh, yeah.
And then you get that syndrome called Stendhal syndrome, which brings on all that emotion, right? And crying, and you want to reach out and touch things, feel how smooth something is or how rough the stone might be. And I was wondering if you were ever tempted.
No. I think having grown up in New York and going to the Met a lot when you're here and seeing people touch things, I have such a visceral reaction when someone, because especially in the Egyptian wing, it's so tempting the sarcophagus, it's so interesting, the texture. You'd love to, but I would never go near it. No, I'd be terrified.
I have a story.
Ooh, yeah.
So, and this is going to be on radio.
Right,
so
right.
Maybe I'll be arrested. Many years ago, when I was a young actress and I had a fabulous young boyfriend, we traveled to the Ivory Coast. He later went on to become my first husband and the father of my 2 daughters. And he was from France, so Ivory Coast is a former French colony. And we traveled around the country, and we bought this thing, which was a wooden door to a granary. They're carved doors. And we had this door, and we lived in LA, and we lived in Paris, and we moved to New York, and we went to the Met. And in the Rockefeller wing of African art, they have these doors. And I thought, oh, what did we walk out? Ours is probably a fake. And we ended up moving a lot, and the door comes from a region called Dogon, D-O-G-O-N. So we had it in a box that said D-O-G-O-N, door. So we started calling it the doggone door. And long story short, we divorced, I remarried, decades went by. I was just getting rid of a storage unit, and I told my assistant, look for that doggone door. I haven't seen, it's gone.
Oh.
The doggone door is gone.
Oh.
It's not in the house. It wasn't in the storage unit. I don't know. So I don't know if we had an artifact or a fake.
Wow.
We did not steal it. We bought it. But
No.
that's my story.
When you finish writing a book, do you miss your characters? And then another version of that is there a character that you wrote that you're like, oh, I really like him or her?
Oh, that's a great question. You know, I find by the time I've done those 10 revisions and it's gone through copy edits and the proofreader, you are so tired of these characters. You just want them to go away and stop annoying you. But then again, there's that lag time. And so 6 or 8 months later, you launch the book and officially go on tour. And then it's so much fun because it's like visiting old friends. It's like, oh, Charlotte and Annie, you know, and you're struggling through the current books. You're like, they are wonderful, you know. They make it look so easy. Yeah. And I think, you know, in the very first book I wrote, The Dollhouse, Darby is one of my favorite characters because she's a quirky duck.
I know you're busy right now, but I have 2 recommendations, and I wanted to know whether you've considered them already. The American Museum of Natural History and the Empire State Building.
They're both very, very good. Yeah. You know, with each one, I have to do so much research and figure out what decade, you know, should it be split timeline? Should it be one timeline? But those are both excellent, excellent choices. And so far, every building I've dug into, there's been something that clicked. So yeah, you never know. You know what building comes up all the time too? The Flatiron Building. People love it.
That's a great building.
But I'm having a hard time finding a story there. If anyone knows of any surprises about the Flatiron, let me know.
Oh, okay. And Only Murders in the Building got the Ansonia.
No,
so that isn't the Ansonia?
It's not the Ansonia. It's what's it called?
Was.
It's a few blocks from the Arc. That's in the.
Oh, I thought they.
That's in the show.
Arconia.
That's a fake name. Is it the Ardsley? What's the real name of it?
Ansonia.
I think it's the.
Because they have that courtyard.
Yeah, it's right on 86th Street. It's so beautiful. It's so funny because that's our subway stop basically. And so you come up and there's all these people gathered in front of the entrance taking photos when they never were before. But it's a beautiful building and the interiors are really stunning. There's so many like that. The Ansonia, there's so many really.
So many.
Yeah.
I have a building story for you because I don't write buildings. I used to live at 408 West 57th. And this is the corner of 57th and 9th. And there was a building on the corner, 400 West 57th. And it had a deli in it called the 400. And one day in about 1984, they shut it down. They were going to restore it. Go by, it's still under scaffolding.
Oh,
you can
I
read
know
all
exactly.
about 400
I know exactly
West
what building that is. Yeah.
Owned by someone in China. There were squatters. They were running cords up into the building.
It's a huge building.
This is decades. Yeah. So, crazy New York story.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us for this special broadcast of the Ocean House Author Series with Deborah Goodrich Royce. Please tune in each month as we'll bring you a new Ocean House Author Series highlighting nationally best-selling and award-winning authors in a salon-style conversation. Hosted by Ocean House owner, actress, and best-selling author Deborah Goodrich Royce. The WCRI is pleased to be partnering with the Ocean House to bring you this ongoing series highlighting the best and the brightest of the literary world. Thank you once again for joining us. And in the words of Margaret Atwood, in the end, we all become stories.